When X-rays were first discovered, nobody fully understood radiation. Scientists knew it could pass through skin and show bones. But the idea that invisible rays could destroy living tissue was not yet accepted. So early X-ray machines were built without shielding. No protective walls. No lead aprons. No safety distance. Operators would hold plates by hand. Doctors would test the machine on themselves. Dentists would expose patients again and again. The more clear the image, the better, so they increased the exposure time. Some early X-ray sessions lasted 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even longer. And at first, nothing seemed wrong. Because radiation does not always punish you instantly. Sometimes it waits. When X-rays were first discovered, nobody fully understood radiation. Scientists knew it could pass through skin and show bones. But the idea that invisible rays could destroy living tissue was not yet accepted. So early X-ray machines were built without shielding. No protective walls. No lead aprons. No safety distance. Operators would hold plates by hand. Doctors would test the machine on themselves. Dentists would expose patients again and again. The more clear the image, the better, so they increased the exposure time. Some early X-ray sessions lasted 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even longer. And at first, nothing seemed wrong. Because radiation does not always punish you instantly. Sometimes it waits. The first warning signs were small. People who worked with X-rays started noticing redness on their hands. Like a sunburn. Then peeling skin. Then pain that would not stop. Some operators lost fingernails. Some developed strange wounds that never healed. But instead of thinking radiation, many thought it was heat, chemicals, stress, poor hygiene. So they kept working. And then the real horror began. Skin turned black. Flesh died. Infections spread. And doctors started amputating fingers, then hands, then arms. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Because radiation damage is not only external. It attacks deep inside the body. And years later, many of those workers developed cancers so aggressive, doctors were shocked. These were not random illnesses. It was science silently killing the people who served it. By the 1920s and 1930s, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Radiologists, people whose job was X-rays, were dying young. Some died from leukemia. Some from bone cancer. Some from tumors that spread faster than any doctors could treat. And it wasn't only doctors. There was another group of workers, mostly young women, who became the symbol of this disaster. They were called the Radium Girls. They were hired to paint glow-in-the-dark numbers on watch dials. Their paint contained radium, a radioactive element. And the factory managers told them it was safe. So safe, that the girls were instructed to shape the brush tip with their lips. Again and again. Hundreds of times per day. They were literally swallowing radioactive material. And at first, the girls looked magical. Their teeth glowed. Their dresses sparkled in the dark. They laughed about it. Until their jaws began to rot. And their bones began to break. This was no longer a simple workplace accident. It was a scientific crime, built on ignorance and greed. At first, the Radium Girls didn't feel sick. That's the terrifying part about radiation. It doesn't always burn like fire. It doesn't always cut like a blade. It often enters the body silently, and then begins destroying you from the inside. The girls worked in factories in the United States, painting tiny watch numbers with radium paint. They were paid well for the time. Many were teenagers. Some were supporting their families. And radium was marketed like a miracle element. People believed it gave energy. Some companies even sold radium water as a health drink. So when the girls were told, it's safe, they believed it. But radium is not like X-rays. X-rays pass through you. Radium becomes part of you. Once swallowed, it behaves like calcium, and your body stores it in the bones. So every time they shaped the brush with their lips, they were putting death directly into their skeleton. Then the symptoms began. It started with tooth pain. One girl went to the dentist, and the dentist pulled a tooth. But the hole never healed. Instead, the bone inside her jaw began to decay. Then another tooth fell out. Then another. Soon, the dentist could literally lift parts of the jawbone out with forceps. Some of the girls developed what doctors called radium jaw. Their mouths smelled of rot. Their faces swelled. Their bones became soft. Some of them could not eat. And the most horrifying detail? Their bones sometimes glowed faintly in the dark. Because radium was inside them. But when the girls went to the company didn't admit guilt. Instead, the managers tried to destroy them. They blamed poor hygiene, sexually transmitted diseases, women's weakness, anything except radium. And even worse, the company secretly knew radium was dangerous. Because inside the same factories, the scientists and male technicians were using lead shields, gloves, ventilation, safety procedures. But the girls? They were told to keep licking the brush. Finally, a small group of sick women decided to fight back. Imagine the courage that took. They were young, many could barely walk, some were dying. But they went to court. They hired lawyers. They spoke to newspapers. They told the public the truth. And the companies fought hard to stop them. They delayed the case. They paid experts to lie. They tried to run out the clock. Because if the girls died, the case would disappear. But the story became too big. America began to understand something terrifying. Modern science could kill not because it was evil, but because people were careless and greedy. Eventually, the Radium Girls won. Not because the system was kind, but because the evidence was undeniable. And their suffering became a turning point in labor rights and workplace safety. Their case helped create stronger laws for industrial safety, worker compensation, corporate accountability. The Radium Girls didn't just expose a company. They exposed a dangerous truth about the modern world. If a new technology makes money, safety often comes last. After these tragedies, scientists began to finally admit what was happening. Radiation was not a harmless miracle. It was a powerful tool, and a powerful threat. Medical workers started developing safety rules such as lead aprons, shielding walls, exposure time limits, distance rules, radiation badges to measure dose. And slowly, radiology became safer. But the cost of that knowledge was horrifying. The people who discovered radiation's dangers were not protected. They were sacrificed. Some historians call them the martyrs of radiology. Doctors, scientists, technicians. People who believed they were helping humanity. Many of them died from cancers caused by their own work. And the Radium Girls? They became the most famous victims of all. Their bones remained radioactive for decades. Even after death, their bodies were still emitting radiation. That's how deep the damage was. By now you might be thinking, so what was the deadliest mistake in science history? Was it X-rays? Was it radium? Here's the hard truth. The deadliest mistake wasn't one single machine. The deadliest mistake was something deeper. Humans built powerful science faster than they built safety. Radiation, chemicals, electricity, nuclear power. Every new breakthrough arrived with excitement. But safety rules usually came later, after people were already dead. And nowhere was this more terrifying than in the nuclear era. Because when nuclear science went wrong, it didn't just kill one person. It could poison cities. After World War II, the world entered the nuclear age. Scientists had unlocked a force that could power cities or destroy them. But the problem was this: nuclear science is not forgiving. A small mistake is not a small mistake. It can become a radiation release, a reactor explosion, long-term contamination, cancers that appear years later. And history proved this again and again. We all know the famous disasters: Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island. But there was a lesser-known nuclear tragedy that is almost unbelievable. A deadly accident inside a laboratory. A moment where one tiny action turned into instant death. It's known as the Demon Core. In 1945 and 1946, scientists in the United States were studying a small sphere of plutonium. It was meant for a nuclear weapon. This core was extremely dangerous. Because it was close to critical, meaning, if it reached the right conditions, it could start a runaway nuclear reaction. Not a nuclear bomb explosion, but something still deadly. A burst of radiation so intense it could kill you in seconds. Scientists were performing risky experiments to test how close it was to critical. And here's the mistake: they were doing it with unsafe methods. One famous experiment involved 2 halves of a beryllium shell that reflected neutrons. The scientist would bring the halves close together around the plutonium core. Closer, closer. The closer the shell, the more the reaction increased. To prevent it from going fully critical, the scientist used a simple tool as a spacer. Not a safety device. Not a machine. A tool. In one incident, a scientist named Louis Slotin was holding the shell with one hand and using a screwdriver as the spacer. A screwdriver. And then it slipped. For a split second, the shell closed too far. The core went critical. The room filled with a flash of blue light. And in that instant, Louis Slotin received a lethal dose of radiation. He pushed the shell apart and saved others in the room. But he had already absorbed death. He died days later. And several others in the room later developed serious health problems. That single moment became one of the most famous human error tragedies in science. Because it showed something terrifying. Even the smartest people in the world can die from a simple mistake. And now we arrive at the real point of this story. The deadliest mistake in science history is not radium paint. It is not X-ray machines. It is not even nuclear experiments. The deadliest mistake is when humans trust a new discovery before understanding its consequences. And this happens repeatedly. Because when a new technology arrives, society goes through 3 phases. 1. Excitement, this will change everything. 2. Denial, it can't be dangerous. 3. Reality, people are dying. Only after the reality phase do we build laws. And that's why tragedies like the Radium Girls matter. Not only because they suffered, but because their suffering forced the world to learn. And the world still repeats this pattern today. With new chemicals, AI, social media, biotech, surveillance tech, and future weapons. Science is not evil. But science without safety can become deadly. When you look back at these tragedies, one thing becomes painfully clear. Many of the victims were not reckless criminals. They were normal people. Young factory workers trying to earn a living. Doctors trying to help patients. Scientists pushing the limits of knowledge. The Radium Girls did not sign up to be human experiments. Early radiologists did not understand the danger. And even brilliant nuclear scientists sometimes trusted their own skill more than the rules. But nature doesn't care about our intentions. Radiation does not care if you're a hero. It does not care if you're trying to save the world. It only follows physics. And physics is unforgiving. The good news is that these tragedies were not meaningless. They forced science to grow up. Because after these disasters, the modern world slowly built something powerful. Safety culture. A new way of thinking that says, don't just ask if we can do it. Ask what happens if it goes wrong. From these events came radiation dose limits, protective shielding, warning labels, worker rights, safety audits, ethical research rules, industrial regulations. In other words, science became safer not because people became smarter, but because people finally respected risk. And today, because of those lessons, millions of medical X-rays are taken safely every year. Radiation therapy saves cancer patients. Nuclear medicine helps diagnose disease. Even nuclear energy, when properly managed, can power cities. But none of that safety was free. It was paid for with human lives. Now here's the part most people don't want to hear. Even today, we still repeat the same deadly mistake. Because the modern world is addicted to new chemicals, new technologies, new apps, new medicine, new AI. And the pattern is still the same. First, we celebrate. Then, we deny the risks. Then, we react only after harm appears. Think about how long it took society to understand. Smoking, asbestos, lead in paint, unsafe industrial chemicals, harmful social media effects. The Radium Girls happened 100 years ago. But the mindset that caused it is still alive. Whenever profit comes first, and safety comes later, history repeats. So what was the deadliest mistake in science history? It wasn't a single experiment. It was a human habit. A habit of believing that because something looks impressive, it must be safe. The Radium Girls taught the world that invisible dangers can destroy the body. Early X-ray victims taught the world that medical miracles can become medical nightmares. And the Demon Core taught the world that even a tiny error can be fatal when the power is too great. Science is one of the greatest forces humans have ever created. But science without ethics, science without safety, science without responsibility, can become the deadliest mistake of all. Because the most dangerous thing in history is not technology. It is human confidence without caution.
Subscribe Info Beyond Borders now for more mind-blowing knowledge.